And very nice of all of you joining us on Zoom. It does feel very, very strange to have so many participants, but very, very nice new feeling. It's been a long time. I'll try and address everything that I say, both to everybody here in the room and to everybody on Zoom, and hope that I manage that tightrope walk. Well, for those who are joining, I just got to get it. This meeting is being recorded. Right, there we go. It's not a touch screen.
When you look straight, that's what people at home see. So it's fine. Just look straight on.
So I look at that. Right, okay.
When you look at that, it looks like you're looking at that.
Okay. Hopefully we've sorted out all our technical problems, which we've had a few little teething issues, but I think they've been sorted out. I'd like to say a little bit about the class and my role here. Although I'm sitting in the high seat, as it were, feels quite intimidating, great responsibility. But something happens sometimes when one sits up here. I think the years of practice and connection with the Sangha and with running events, lay events, the association between sitting here and the Dhamma feels always a bit stronger. At the same time, I would like to stress that everything that I say is sort of stuff that I've tried to sort through and make sense for myself. And it's really an encouragement to reflect on one's own practice, on your experiences, just as I always reflect on my own. The evening is basically consists of some silent practice, which will follow the taking of the refuges and precepts, and a few reflections, which I'm not quite sure what the theme will be. I'm open to suggestions. If there's anything that interests anybody in particular, then please do let me know when we come to that part of the evening. So I have Imogen here very kindly screen sharing and letting people in. And we'll do the taking the dedication. Page 2 actually. It's dedication of offerings. I will light a candle and candles, and also the incense. For those who are new to the group, I don't recognize all the names, so some of you may be new. The chanting and the bowing is all quite optional. It's something that is practiced in this tradition. It's a sort of way of connecting on a regular basis and creating a set of associations with a relationship to the teachings, to truth teachings, which is one of respect and acknowledgement. And the bowing is a way of saying, I don't know all the answers. And as one's devotional practice develops, it can actually be a way of sort of surrendering to a higher understanding, which paradoxically we all can respond to, because we all have Buddha nature, and this is our way of connecting with a truth which transcends conventional understanding, and is something that can be realized by us all. So I have a bell here. I'm not sure whether you can hear this on Zoom, but we can hear it in this room. So I'll just ring this occasionally as a sign that we're moving into another scene in this participatory act of sharing a puja. And hopefully you'll see, if you're online, you'll see us responding here on screen. So I'll light the incense, candles and incense, and we'll take it from there. of this evening to many more future in-person meetings here at the Buddhist Society. Page 2 is the dedication of offerings, chanting Pali and in English. Yoso Bhagava Araham Samma Sambuddho, to the Blessed One, the Lord who fully attained perfect enlightenment. Swakato yena bhagavata dhammo, to the teaching which he expounded so well. Supatipanno yassa bhagavato sāvaka sangho, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Tammayam bhagavantam sadhammam sasangham, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha, imehi sakare yataraham aropite abhipujayama. We render with offerings our rightful homage. Sadhu no bhante bhagava suchira parini bhutopi. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, Pachima Janata Nukampamanasa, still had compassion for later generations. Ime sakare dugatapanna karabhute patigam hatu. May these simple offerings be accepted. Amhakam didaratam hitaya sukhaya, for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and Blessed One. Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivadeni, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammam namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sangham namami, I bow to the Sangha. Andamayam Buddhasa Bhagavato Puvavaganamakaram Karamaste. Now let us pay preliminary homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed, Noble and perfectly enlightened One.
Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one.
And I go to page 128. So we're taking the three refuges. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. To the Buddha I go for refuge, to the Dhamma I go for refuge, to the Sangha I go for refuge. Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. For the second time to the Buddha I go for refuge. For the second time to the Dhamma I go for refuge. For the second time to the Sangha I go for refuge. Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. For the third time to the Buddha I go for refuge. For the third time to the Dhamma I go for refuge. For the third time to the Sangha I go for refuge. So we go to the 5 precepts, which we'll chant both in Pali and in English, and then repeat in English, say in English. Anatikata veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adina dhammana veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kamesu michachara veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musavada veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Surameya majjapamadatana veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness. Imani pancha sikkhapadani silena sugatim yanti, silena bodhasampada, silena nibutim yanti, tasma silam visodaye. These are the 5 precepts. Virtue is a source of happiness. Virtue is a source of true love. Virtue is a source of peacefulness. Therefore, let virtue be purified.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
taking the refuges and determining the 5 precepts in a formal, ritualized way is a way of affirming a commitment to practice, to a way of affirming the significance of what one is doing. We may have all sorts of mental, emotional aspirations, but actually declaring something in words carries a certain power to it. It's one thing to think that one likes somebody, but to actually say that one likes somebody has a greater order of weight to it. And it's nice to say, well, yes, I'm committed to truth, I'm committed to waking up to reality, waking up to making a determination to live by certain guidelines. They can be nice intentions, but to actually declare them adds a power, a bit of gravitas to them. And chanting them collectively as well adds even more connection to it, creates a collective process of mutual alignment, collective alignment to a set of values, set of aspirations, which are inspiring, uplifting, and hopefully eventually transform our lives. So in taking refuge in the Buddha, we're not taking refuge in his historical personage or individual. One's taking refuge in what he represents and in what he realized. And having, as it were, penetrated the truth, he then shared it in a way that enables us to follow in his footsteps, but not just follow, follow that way, in that way as well. I was just trying to think of the different ways one could be following somebody. He pointed to a reality which is ever present and which transcends the conditioned realm, and yet at the same time also includes it. And our path, in a way, follows the same trajectory. We experience our humanity in physical form, in a body with the 5 senses, and we get caught up in sense experiences, including the 6th sense, of course, the mind. And what the Buddha was pointing to was a reality that includes all those senses, but also transcends them, a timeless reality. And the paradox is that we can realize this timeless dimension right here, right now. So intellectually, it might be a bit difficult to sort of make sense of, but gradually, by reflecting on one's immediate everyday experience and the relentless changing flow of phenomena, eventually a constant emerges, an ever-present reality of awareness. And it takes a while to get there, because we're so caught up in relating to the objects of phenomena that arise in our mind-body organisms. So one big part of practice, of course, is mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness is key. And meditation practice, as we're sitting here, either in the society, at the Buddhist Society, or on our cushions or seats at home. It's just being in a space of silence and quiet, hopefully, and just being in a witnessing mode, observing, experiencing mode. We may be here this evening having had a very full and busy day, and our mind's probably still active, so we just make sure that we're sitting comfortably at home or here, and just allowing ourselves to be present, just noticing how it is in the moment. We use our bodies as a reference point because our experience of the body is always in the present. Sensations arise and cease in the present. So we try and get out of our head and into the body. And let's be conscious of, be aware, reflectively aware as to where our attention is. Is it on the past? Is it on the future? Is it in some speculative realm? Or are we here and now? In terms of presence. So we notice what it's like sitting on a cushion or a chair, the weight of the body, and the sitting bones, the spine, the head on top of the spine, shoulders relaxed. We can imagine that we're suspended by a golden thread from the crown of our head right up into the heavens, at the same time grounded with our legs and our bottoms sitting on a cushion or a chair. And it's always helpful to be aware of the exhalation as a point of relaxation, of letting go. For a few breaths, one just pause for a little bit at the end of the out breath, just to help the mind settle and the body get used to the fact that it doesn't have to be in alert mode anymore. It can just be present moment awareness mode. So, we may find our mind is gravitating to some event during the day, or some event that might be awaiting us in the future. So we don't fight it, we just notice it and bring our attention back to something which is happening all the time, which is the in-breath and the out-breath. So we can notice that either by the nose, the nostrils is where the air enters, We might notice it in the back of the throat as it enters the windpipe. You might notice it in the heart region and the lungs, with the expansion and contraction of each in-breath and out-breath. And as we relax, we might notice it in the belly as well, as the diaphragm relaxes. And on the in-breath, presses down on the organs, inner organs of the body. So we may feel our waistline expand a little bit on the in-breath and contract on the exhalation. Since we're most of the time living in our heads, in our busy society, it's nice to be able to breathe deep into the body so that the whole body is breathing, not just the upper parts of the lung. So we can consciously relax and allow the exhalation to sink deep so that our body becomes more firmly grounded in our seated posture. We notice how our mind might follow the sound of a siren. The sound of the siren fades, leaving silence. Silence which is always present behind all the noise. And we observe how the mind responds to silence, how it reacts to silence. And we don't fight the activity of the mind, which is designed to think. We just shift our attention to the simple fact of being aware, noticing that we're noticing, being aware of awareness. Our whole life arises and ceases in awareness from moment to moment. But awareness itself is quite timeless. Timeless in that it's always present. We just lose sight of it when we get caught up in a thought or an emotion or a narrative or a drama of some kind. If we notice that, we just come back to being here and now. You can use a mantra, such as right now. It's just like this, however it might be. Or we can just tune into the sense of I amness, of just being present. Every now and then just checking in, noticing where one's attention has drifted off to, whether it's present or far away. Everything we experience with awareness and in awareness. The contents come and go, be it sensations or thoughts or feelings. The only constant is awareness. So noticing the transition from formal sitting to just sitting. What's the difference? So feel free to adjust your legs and position. Sometimes just being mindfully still and silent can just be fine in itself. Just a sort of a reflective pause in the flow of life. A bit of respite from all that's happening in terms of having to deal with all the conditions that we find ourselves in, whether it be a relationship or work, going to work, coming from work, doing the shopping, keeping on top of things, whatever they might be. So although we may have a set time to practice, we try and put into practice, whether it be 15 minutes, half an hour in the morning or evening. That's just the sort of formal side. But just pausing during the day for a few minutes every now and then. Just taking an in-breath and an out-breath. Just to break up this flow of activity that we're all, in one way or another, generally caught up in. We may struggle with a sense of lack of fulfillment, perhaps. So it's good to examine why we might be feeling unfulfilled or unhappy. It's usually because we want something. We either want something that we haven't got. It's always that, actually. Or we want to get rid of what we've got. And that engages our thinking mind, which is that part of the brain that tries to find solutions. So either we end up fantasizing about the past or the future, working out strategies, or just feeling despondent. But the question is, where does all this activity take place? Where is it happening? We may find a solution to a specific problem by talking to somebody or rearranging our affairs in one way or another. So that's dealing with it on the conditioned level. Introducing a new set of conditions to affect the conditions that we're experiencing, bring about a change. But that's just tinkering with conditions. What the teachings are pointing to is an escape from that, a release from that, where we, in a sense, disengage from trying to tinker around with the conditions and change the whole perspective completely by waking up to where those conditions are arising and ceasing. And even if we start off by just having an idea, that's a sort of first step in that direction, that there is an unconditioned, there is a timeless dimension, which includes all the phenomena, all the conditions that we're experiencing. And that timeless is actually present here and now. That's where everything's arising, in a timeless dimension. The later Buddhist traditions referred to it as Buddha nature. And Buddha nature sees all conditions as suffering because they're impermanent. They don't give satisfaction in themselves. They might give temporary reward, but then they pass and fade away. It's the dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness which comes with existence. That's not to deny the value of existence, but it's a characteristic of existence. So we don't have to look at it on a metaphysical level, we look at it in our individual lives. And as we get older, we see this pattern repeating itself again and again, of getting caught up in a drama, the drama playing itself out, and then the drama's over. Some respite, and then another drama comes over the horizon. So with experience, with age, one can see this pattern, these patterns in life. And as we recognize the pattern, our relationship can change to this coming and going, which is why it's so helpful to have a practice, have a reflective side to one's practice, to sort of learn from this experience that all phenomena is relentlessly changing. And the message that comes through is that we can't find fulfillment or happiness in phenomena for that very reason. That doesn't mean that we don't look after ourselves, that we don't treat people with respect, that we don't try and create comfortable conditions. But these conditions that we try and create are basically ones that allow us to live and eventually wake up in the sense of be enlightened, become wise. these relentless assaults on our sense of well-being by existence are a teaching in themselves. It's the experience of life that teaches us about the characteristics of life and existence. We tend to relate to the world through a sense of I, me and mine, which is very, very natural. Because we do have a body which appears to be separate from the environment, but actually we know that it's not separate. It's very much integral, very much an expression of the environment. It's evolved out of the environment we're in. But it's a stream of interconnected conditions that give rise to a body and a mind, with its perceptions, its feelings, its thoughts, with all the senses. But they will eventually fade, pass away, which takes us into the realm of illness and eventually old age and eventually death. And our sense of being a separate self rebels against this, doesn't like it. But if we examine this process of our existence closely, it's an inevitable conclusion. It often leads to despair and sadness and depression, but it needn't. It needn't. In fact, those insights can lead to liberation, to freedom from suffering, if we wake up. If we wake up. I've noticed in recent years my practice has revolved more and more around this reflection on awareness, this magical quality. This is the only thing that is real. Real in the sense it is always present. And yet there's nothing present. Awareness is not a thing, it's not an object. But everything that we experience arises in it, with it. And all we have to do is to just come into this sense of present moment being awareness. But if we observe what this being is, it's just a flow of phenomena where it's witnessed. But the being itself is not an object, it's not anything that can be measured. But recognizing the significance of awareness suddenly frees us from the entanglement that we have when we get caught up in what we experience. So we get caught up in what we're experiencing without recognizing where we're experiencing it. What is it that is experiencing it? The awareness doesn't belong to anybody. We arise in it and we eventually fade out of it. When I say we, all our faculties, our senses, they all come and go. But when we wake up to this timeless, deathless realm of wisdom, it's a sense of relief, a sense of release. And each one of us has that potential capacity. It takes no effort to be aware. Even as we're sitting here, there's a knowing taking place, a knowing which is happening, that right now is just like this. So each one of us, in our different forms, will be experiencing the physical sensation of sitting, of listening, of hearing a voice, of thinking about what might be being said, or being somewhere else, perhaps, in one's thought realm. But there's this background knowing of how it is right now. It's natural, it's innate, and it's always present. So things change in it, but it itself, and it's not an it as an object, doesn't change. It's referred to as present moment awareness, our Buddha mind, our Buddha nature. And if we examine any aspect of our life, any aspect of our experience with this perspective, it rings true. Because it is just the way it is, the way things are. So there are a few reflections that come to mind. I don't want to make this evening class a monologue, so I'm very open to any questions or issues that you may want to bring, whether it be online or in the room itself. Yes, Mariana. Hi.
How do we navigate between being firm with ourselves and being kind as well? What is the best attitude of mind that gets us to strike that balance between the two?
Well, the question for those online who may not have heard it is, how does one strike a balance between being firm and being kind? Yes. Well, the answer is the same. Awareness of what's happening. We have an intuitive sense, and we know when we're being too firm with ourselves and too strict with ourselves. And we know when we might be being too grandmotherly kind and just overindulging, perhaps. And we do it through trial and error. When we start on this path of inquiry and go beyond what the world has to offer, doesn't matter what tradition one is exploring and experimenting. And my experience from what I've seen and people I've talked to who have been on the path, most people go through a period of very intense practice at some point where they become very strong and very determined, or want to be strong and determined but can't and feel that they're a failure, and create all sorts of dramas and additional suffering. But it's something that one seems to need to go through. It's just a learning phase. And that's the beauty of a longer life, is one has time to experiment and try things out and get things wrong. We learn through our so-called mistakes, but they're not mistakes, they're just learning experiences. And that's really a good way to sort of live life as a constant learning experience, rather than having an ideal of how we should be and then feeling that we failed in one way or another.
I was pondering whether, developing the sense of gratitude and a devotional attitude to life is the one that carries us in between those two, as a natural support.
Yes, I think, if one is really curious and really highly motivated to find an answer to this dilemma, this existential dilemma of life, one finds oneself doing things because it's almost like a force of nature. In later Buddhist traditions, it's referred to as a bodhicitta, this drive, this movement towards enlightenment, which in fact all life appears to have. Even when people are looking for pleasure in the senses, what they're looking for fulfillment. They're just looking for fulfillment in sensory pleasures, which are transient. And we probably in our own lives have experimented and tried things that give us pleasure. And then after a while we find that they only give so much pleasure and then they fade or don't provide the goods that we're looking for. Of course, some people just have their particular perspective and get stuck with it and just keep on trying to repeat the same pleasure again and again. And that happens with any sense pleasure, whether it be sex or alcohol or companionship even can become a way of avoiding the sort of deeper questions of life. I think the simplicity of the Buddha's teachings and guidance is really so beautiful. The Five Precepts basically can operate on so many levels. They operate on a social level in being conducive to harmonious coexistence with other people because it's respectful, it's kind, it's not aggressive, doesn't impose on other people. It sort of helps navigate all the relationships that one has to have in life. But that's on a sort of functional, social level. But on a personal practice level, when we come to bhavana, this step beyond just formal observance of certain codes of conduct, at that point, it starts taking on a different meaning because it really starts creating, one could say, a platform. It's a purifying force. When one feels inclined to do something and one doesn't do it, not because there's a precept, but because it intuitively just doesn't feel right anymore. One is sort of breaking the harmony of coexistence. But coexistence does mean often some tension, some pressure. It's very challenging being with someone who's very fixed in their views. How does one live with a person who has fixed views? With difficulty. It rubs up the wrong way. It's very, very challenging. So there's a lot of negotiating that has to take place. But I think if one observes the precepts of right speech, of being truthful in one's communication, truthful in one's intentions, and respectful of others and kind, then that simple formula helps sort one's life out. But we all have so much luggage from the past, which is manifesting in the present, and creating a bit of space around it, I think it's really, really, really important. Which is why a practice of just being quiet, of stopping and pausing, and having good friends. You know, we all know the emphasis in the Buddhist tradition on Sangha. But what is Sangha? Spiritual friendship. So important. Because otherwise one can be very, very lonely. And often one does in lay practice. They lead a very lonely life because not everybody is in tune to the same value system. So to meet, as we're meeting here this evening, or in any other group where there's a collective sense of aspiration, of spending time quietly together, is immensely supporting. We can feel it, I can feel it. There's a sense of calmness, pleasant coexistence, which has an effect on the mind-body, and we just hopefully leave an evening such as this feeling a bit more benign, less aggressive, less defensive, and that's sort of these subtle fruits of practice, and a nice frame of mind.
Thank you.
There are two messages.
Two messages. Thank you.
Shall I read
Yes,
them
please.
together? The experience that you speak of, is it like consciousness without the other four aggregates, an unborn consciousness not impacted by other aggregates? That was sent about 5 minutes ago.
Right, okay. Could you read that again a bit more loudly?
Of course. The experience that you speak of, is it like consciousness without the other four aggregates, an unborn consciousness not impacted by the other aggregates?
Right. Wow. Someone's been studying their Buddhist philosophy.
One other, if you like. No,
Yes, okay. Let's hear the other one.
and this was only a couple of minutes ago. isn't it frightening to stop and think about reality in the way Buddhism describes it? What strategies are there to cope with that fear? It can feel safer to turn away from it all and stick to routine activities.
Right. Two very good questions. Well, I don't want to get too caught up in the metaphysics of Buddhist teachings on the five aggregates, but consciousness, there is an unconditioned consciousness and there's sense consciousness. Most of the consciousness that we refer to in the text is to do with the sense consciousness, and sense consciousness comes and goes. But there is an unconditioned awareness, an unconditioned, you could say, consciousness, which is timeless. It's referred to often as the chitta, the mind. And if one's trying to describe something which is not a thing, what the mind tends to do, it gets caught up in sensory experience. And we can notice that we'll be quite in a witnessing mode, in an observing mode of a situation, and then we can often get caught up in whatever the situation is in such a way that we lose sight of the fact that we are actually, that there is this awareness, and we get caught up in the mechanics, in the detail, in the interaction, that we get lost in it. And then we sort of come out of it, and we have a little bit slightly more of an objective perspective on it. That sort of shows that there's this boundary, this transition takes place, that consciousness gets absorbed in objects, in mental states, in feeling states. But behind it all, there is an awareness, and that's the chitta, which can be recognized and woken up to by each one of us. But it's not mental, and I don't wish to say too much about it without confusing the issue. We are aware, we just have to stop and notice and just be present to this sense of I amness, but recognize that in that I amness there is no I. There is just the I am, the being, present moment awareness. And in that awareness, phenomena arises of the body, of perception, of mental formations, and of sense consciousness, of course, all the senses. We can be aware of our sight and what we're seeing. We can be aware of our hearing and what we're hearing. We can be aware of our smell, capacity to taste, and the capacity to sense with the body. There's a knowing of all these senses, and if we observe the senses, they come and go, depending on what they come into contact with. But there is a constant witnessing, and in this tradition, and in many others, there's this emphasis on being a witness. It's not to deny that we have these experiences, it's to see them arise and cease and recognize their characteristics. And when we start recognizing the constant, which is our awareness, and observe the temporal, the transient in that awareness, we're in the right area of inquiry. And then when we hear affirming statements that we are awareness and not the contents of awareness, we start getting a sense of what this might be pointing to, what it might mean. And initially it's just an intellectual question, what does this all mean? But if one stays with it and really puts one's heart and soul into this question, what is going on, what is actually happening, that adds a dimension of commitment, of energy into this inquiry. And I'd like to put my neck out on this. If the commitment to this inquiry is strong enough and firm enough, it will be eventually rewarded. If we don't make this inquiry, it's less likely to happen because the intensity may be redirected into other activities, which takes us to the second question. Yes, the nature of reality is frightening because from the sense of a separate self, it's transient, it's threatening, and it gives rise to fear and anxiety. But if we look at the practice, what we're cultivating is an open-minded appreciation of what is good. We're cultivating good, kind, connecting qualities. It's our sense of having a separate self that gives rise to suffering, because we're always protecting this mind-body organism. This mind-body organism will eventually fall apart anyhow. We have to come to terms with that. We can do it in whatever way we need to. If one is so frightened that one runs away and doesn't want to address it, that's the thing to do. It's a way of preserving one's sense of self. And it's very understandable and not to be condemned. At the same time, it can be recognized that it is a form of avoidance. And we maybe have to be a little bit slower and practice more devotional practices of chanting the Metta Sutta, of being kind, of creating a nice environment for ourselves, which is supportive to this inquiry. There's no point in terrifying ourselves with the nature of reality. But what we can do is use what the conditioned realm has to offer, which is beauty, sense of connection with others, love, an affirmation of all that is good. So it doesn't have to be frightening, but it's understandable if it's experienced as such. T.S. Eliot said that humankind cannot bear very much reality. Well, he's absolutely right. So we recognize that. But the thing to do, that reality can be frightening when it's talked about. But what is the immediate reality? What is actually happening right now? My hope is that you're not suffering from an illness, not suffering from some terrible imposition, but sitting on a cushion, sitting on your chair, sitting on your settee, and just being present. This is the reality. Present moment experience is reality. And all we want to do is to tease apart our awareness of what's happening and notice the characteristics of what is happening. The cup of tea you may have made yourself is getting cold. That's what happens. Have a hot cup of tea, let it stand for any length of time, it goes cold. So you witness and observe the transient nature of a cup of tea. We're here, we won't be here one day. That's a fact. Ajahn Chah was giving a lecture once on a glass that he was holding, and he said, this glass is already broken. We look after it, we drink from it and use it, but it's already broken. In other words, he's pointing to the transient nature of a glass. Our bodies are the same. This body's already dead. This happens to be alive at the moment, but it's going to be dead one day. It may not sound very comforting, but it's true. And I can't really say much more except that we have to find the truth of the way things are and come to terms with it. But our acceptance of the way things are is the way out of it. As we expose ourselves to this transient nature of reality in our everyday lives, yes, eventually, things do get through. Our disposition towards what we experience changes. It starts when we're very young. We get a toy, we play with the toy, maybe a teddy bear or maybe a little vehicle that drives from A to B, and then someone either takes it or it breaks and there's a disappointment. What is life doing? It's teaching us all the time that life is transient, objects are transient, feelings are transient. We fall in love and think it's the end or the beginning of our life, and then we fall out of love, or we're abandoned, or our lover walks away and says they're not interested in us anymore. We have a broken heart. Well, it's good to have a broken heart, actually. Very, very painful. I remember when I had my heart broken. It's a terrible experience. It took me 2 years to get over it. But I look back on it and I think, well, actually it taught me something. It made me much more responsible and much more aware of the fragility of relationships and that they don't necessarily fulfill. So looking back on it, I don't like saying it, but I'm very grateful I had my heart broken, because it taught me a lesson about life, that I can't find happiness in another person. I might find happiness in a companionship with another fellow being, But that, in a sense, starts transcending the romantic side of a relationship. It just becomes a companionship. Because as lay people, we live in a lay life. Our Sangha become our community, our partners, or can do. And having a shared interest in the truth of the way things are makes an enormous difference, which is why we have monastic communities, because of course people have a shared agenda. They're not there for physical relationships. They're there because they want to wake up to a reality which we all intuit is there, but can't actually put our finger on. Why? Because that ultimate reality cannot have a finger put on it, but it can be known, it can be lived, it can be experienced. And that's why deeper practice can be so immensely rewarding, because it takes us into a realm of immense fulfillment. And that fulfillment manifests how? Peacefulness, sense of peace, sense of calmness, sense of presence, which then communicates itself quite naturally as being kind and compassionate and generous. And in being generous with and of service to others, we tend to find that the world responds in kind. I don't know if that answers the questions, but I hope it goes some way to doing so. Would anybody else like to contribute or say anything?
I find it difficult in these, situations that we find our country in and other countries to kind of not be upset by all that. And I can say, well, yes, I'm aware I'm upset, but it doesn't really help because it impinges a lot,
It does
Our
indeed.
leaders
It does
are just so wrong in every way, and so are other countries' leaders, and kind of how. Sometimes I think, how do I actually cope with living in these terrible situations?
Yeah.
And I'm not in a terrible situation myself, but I can feel it with other people are.
Yeah. I suspect if we asked everybody who was participating in this evening class, they'd raise a hand in agreeing with you. I certainly would. I find it very distressing. But it also confirms the truth of the truth teachings, that conditions change. And our conditions are not particularly good in this country from an economic perspective or political perspective. But then, what are the values? What are the conditions that are generating all of this? It's greed, delusion, hatred. I wouldn't say hatred, but a lot of animosity. Yeah. And if we look at
people not like us,
and that is very disturbing. Why? Because we have empathy. We can tune in. We can feel these things. So what do? We have to protect our senses, not expose ourselves to excessive amounts of trauma, essentially, as these images that we see on television are quite horrendous. At the same time, what answer is there to that? This is life. This is reality for many, many people. And I find that being able to tune out of that frame of reference, it's not avoidance. It's actually maintaining some sense, some level of internal equilibrium and balance. And I think that just having the practice that we've been doing, for instance, this evening, of just sitting, being quiet, having empathy for all the suffering that's going on in the world, all those poor people losing their homes, losing their children, losing their loved ones, being in war, fighting to protect their country, being killed, killing perhaps in self-defense. That's the tragedy of life. That's the sadness of life. But that's dukkha of the conditioned world. But we can get overwhelmed by it. But the moment we, as it were, tune in to the sense of being that I've been referring to, something happens. We don't get so flooded by the conditions that are out there, perceived through the senses. We come to a place of inner stillness, and out of that stillness comes an understanding that all that suffering as a cause is a manifestation of conditions, that we don't have to contribute to it. We're not participating in it in any aggressive or negative way. We can have sympathy, we can have love, we can have compassion for the suffering. And our biggest contribution to the world is to live our lives ethically, with virtue, with sensitivity, with kindness, knowing that our individual actions may not change very much, but they're the biggest contribution that we can give. And if circumstances put us into a place where we can offer help or be kind to somebody, we can manifest that kindness and be helpful and kind. We can be forgiving, because just as it says in the Christian scripture, forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. A lot of this is because there is literally ignorance. They don't know what they're doing. But sometimes we get caught up in conditions which have a force and a manifestation that is greater than our likes or dislikes. It's just history unfolding. And we can get caught up in an emotional response, but I think the teachings point to the fact that we can find a place of stillness in all this terror and horror of the world, because we think that these conditions are real. Well, they are real, but they're transient as well, and they're not permanent. No, this doesn't answer your question fully, but at the same time,
good to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's important to reflect on it. Because we're talking about things that we know are happening, but we know on the mental realm. But what is our immediate reality? Our immediate reality is here and now. For us, it's this room at the moment as we're experiencing it. Our presence, our bodies, our minds, as they're functioning and communicating with each other. I have a camera in front of me, and everybody who's watching online, to me, it's very difficult, because I can't actually see. I can see some little images on a screen, and I have to look here, but in fact I've been told to look here because this is how you see me. Otherwise I'm looking at a screen. But I know that there are people sitting there, but they are a bit abstract. I'm sorry folks, but it's true. This room feels much more real to me than all the people on the images that I have. At the same time, I know that there are real people there, but I have to sort of expand my sort of thinking a little bit to connect with that dimension. I feel much happier if we were all together in the same room. Then that would be a collective, immediate reality that we'd all be sharing. At the same time, I know from the feedback that we have from these Zoom sessions that these sessions do affect people who are on the screen. Just as when I'm watching a session on a screen or participating in a retreat on a screen, I'm affected and moved by it. But it does become a bit more abstract. So this technology is wonderful, but it's one removed from the immediacy of the moment. But knowing what I'm saying, as I'm saying it, actually brings me into the present moment. And I do the best I can with whatever skills I have in trying to include everybody who's participating in the session, be it physically or virtually. So we live in interesting times. Interesting times.
That's a message, Nick.
Yes.
Thank you for these online meditation sessions. I'm following from Los Angeles, USA.
From Los Angeles. Oh, amazing. Welcome. Who's that? Ina. Hi. Amazing. Just shows the power of technology. Glad you can join us. Maybe you'd like to say hello to us. Actually, I'm also noticing the time. The time is 8:05, so we're running over a little bit late. What I'd like to do is to end with a simple chant before we close the class. I think the chant we'll do, which we'll do a screen share on. I know what we'll do. Nice and simple one. Reflections on Universal Well-Being, which is on page 41. It's a lovely chant, this. I often chant page 41, Reflection on Universal Well-Being. It's one that I often chant to myself on the bus, on the underground, when I'm running. It really is universal well-being. Now let us chant the reflections on universal well-being. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. When I chant this on my own, on that last line, instead of chanting of such acts, they will be the heirs, I always change that to we will be the heirs, to make it more personal, more own. Right.
Shared responsibility. Shared responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll do the closing homage, which I believe we'll do the morning one, which is on page 16 in English and in Pali and in English. And, Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddham Bhagavantam Blessed One. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammam Namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sangham Namami, I bow to the Sangha. Well, that concludes our class this evening.
Thank you very much.
Very nice to see you all and be here again. I look forward to future sessions.
Yeah.
And wish you all a good week.